Welcome to Marin Voices and Views. I'm Lawrence Strick, and tonight I'm hosting the show solo. Peter B. Collins is not participating in any of the shows where we're interviewing congressional candidates. Peter's working for one of the candidates, and we don't want to even create any appearance of bias. In the second segment, I'll be speaking with Andy Peri of the Marin Bicycle Coalition about the work they're doing promoting healthy lifestyles around the county. My first guest, however, is Assemblymember Jared Huffman. Jared's here tonight to talk about his campaign for the new 2nd Congressional District. That's an open election, as Congresswoman Woolsey has announced her retirement after serving since 1993. Jared has represented Marin and parts of Sonoma for the past 6 years in the Assembly. Prior to that, he was a director of the Marin Municipal Water District for 12 years, and he also spent time practicing law as a consumer attorney. He's a graduate of the University of California at Santa Barbara and Boston College of Law. He was a member of the United States of America volleyball team, and I think they were world champs in 1987. Sorry about that. He's married and has 2 kids living here in Marin County. Thanks for coming, Jared.
Thanks for having me, Larry.
Before we talk about your congressional race, I'd like to talk a little bit about your tenure in the Assembly.
Yeah.
I understand you're still pushing new bills. You have a bill about funding for the state parks that's really affecting Marin County. Yeah. You're really concerned about school buses for people in the valley, and I miss school buses because I chauffeured my kid way too much here in Marin. Yeah. But as you're coming to the tail end of your Assembly race, looking back at it, what did you find were your biggest successes?
Well, the first thing is that 6 years goes really fast. So I am very struck by that. It's hard to believe in some ways that I am in my final year. But looking back, I feel great about the bills that I've been able to pass. We've been able to pass more than 60 pieces of successful legislation, and that's not easy to do in a place that's as partisan and as gridlocked as Sacramento. So that's good. Maybe even more satisfying, though, is that there's some great quality bills included there, and many of them did pass with bipartisan support. So I think just for a couple quick examples, last year we created a whole new type of corporation in California, a California Benefit Corporation, which is going to have this broad social responsibility duty baked into its mission, and we're already seeing dozens of companies sign up to be benefit corporations. That, over time, could be a transformational piece of public policy. I look back at my lighting efficiency bill, which set the world's most ambitious efficiency standards for lighting, where 25% of our electrical use goes to. That was so successful it became part of the Federal Energy Act, is now the law in the whole country, and is a huge success. Business is thriving, investment has occurred, jobs are created, and consumers are winning because they've got new products on the shelves that last longer, use less energy.
Being in the Assembly for the 5.5 or 6 years that you've been there, it couldn't have all been as you thought it was going to be when you started on the journey. What surprised you about your role as being an Assembly member, and what do you take away from that for your future career path?
Well, one surprise is that sometimes it just takes a lot of effort and it takes a bit of time to get things done, even things that seem obvious. So one example is fighting to stop this terrible death row expansion at San Quentin, which was proposed under Governor Schwarzenegger. I had to fight it for 5 years, and in fact had to hold it off until we could get a new governor into office, and then had to do a bit of pushing with the new governor. But we did finally, after 5 years, stop that and save the state $1.6 billion that we can use on schools instead of prisons. But that was a long, drawn-out fight and took everything I had. I guess the other surprise is that sometimes, as one of 80 Assembly members, you don't always have the influence that you would like to have. Now, I don't know if I can call it a surprise. I think we all would know that. But that's one of the frustrations that sometimes goes with the job. You do get better at it over time, though. As I sit here in year 6, I'm a lot better at using my 1/80th share in that process than I was in year 1.
So you're setting your sights on the Congressional District. It's a new lines. A new district goes all the way up to Crescent City. Yeah. It's huge, and how do you perceive the needs of the district, and are they significantly different down here in Marin and up in the north part of the district?
Well, I think you start with what is common throughout that district, and it is our incredible coastline and our coastal communities, which have a lot in common from the Golden Gate Bridge all the way up to the Oregon border. This is the most iconic coastal district, I think, anywhere in the country. So I think to represent it well, you have to be a champion for the coast. I'm endorsed by all of the environmental and coastal protection groups that have taken a position in this race. Beyond that, there are some other similarities, but there are also some very important differences, and the biggest one is rural versus urban and suburban. The needs that rural communities have, and you mentioned school transportation, that's a lifeline for folks up in southern Humboldt County. If they don't have full funding for school bus service, these kids are going an hour and a half, 2 hours to school each and back every day. Without that funding, they don't get an education. In places like lots of Marin school districts, it's less of an imperative because many of them have already dramatically reduced school transportation. So that's an example of how the needs can differ, but it's mainly a rural-urban difference and not necessarily a north-south or anything like that.
So I can hardly keep track of how many people are running for this district. It's either 7 or 8 Democrats and 1 or 2 Republicans. There's a lot of you. How do you stand out in a crowd like that, and where are your strengths as opposed to some of the other candidates?
Right. Well, there are a lot. I think there may even be 10 Democrats, and at this point just 1 Republican. But my hope is that I will stand out as the person who it was really the only one that combines 3 things that I think are necessary to be a good member of Congress for this district. The first is democratic values, and actually many of us have solid core democratic values. But then number 2 is you have to pair that with a record of getting things done in public office. And I think I am unique in that regard. So not just my 12 years in local government, but the last 6 years in the legislature where I've been able to pass tough bills, work through the partisan gridlock, and get things done. I think that combined with the values is unique and important. And then the third and final piece is you have to have a connection with the district that you want to represent. You can't just wake up one day and say, I want to live there, I want to represent that place. I have been active in this community for over 20 years. I could not be more rooted here. I'm raising my kids here. They're in the schools. My wife's a teacher. I've been involved in nonprofits and volunteer work in the schools community as well as my local government and state representation. So I know this district, I love it, and I think I have the kind of authentic connection that's going to let me represent it very well.
So it sounds like one of the things that your job as assembly member has really taught you is that there needs to be some tenacity about and stick-to-itiveness in this legislative process. And it's just not as easy as it sort of looks. I mean, people complain that people do nothing in Congress all the time. Is that what they're seeing?
Absolutely. You have to be an advocate that is nimble, because sometimes the way you pass a bill is not just to pound the table as hard as you can. There's lots of strategies for getting bills passed. And then the others, you got to be willing to stick with it over time. So one of my greatest bills, I think, provides folks that have solar photovoltaic systems and can generate more energy than they use. Finally, they have a chance to get paid at the end of the year for the surplus. That took me 2 years to pass. And I had to fight PG&E every step of the way and others, but we got it done. So it's an example of how you need a lot of different tools as an advocate, and you also need to be determined and stick with it.
It's funny because you hear on TV on the talk shows that less and less people have confidence in their Congress, in our Congress. Yeah. Many people want small or no government at all. Yet you want to join that club.
I want to change that club.
Well, and how do you respond to those doomsayers that talk about, government being ill or government being not really important in their lives?
Well, I don't disagree with them to the extent that they think Congress has been doing a lousy job. This Congress is the worst Congress I've ever seen in my lifetime. I think it makes the do-nothing Congress of 1948 look like overachievers. But you don't just sit back and complain about it. We don't have to be fatalistic here. We can change it. So, I want to go and be part of a new Congress that goes in there and begins to turn Congress back into a place where you solve problems, where you get things done. And when Congress starts getting things done for the American people, you're going to see that approval rating go right back up again.
Is that possible, you think, as being a new... let me put it this way. I once had a conversation with congressmen, and he told me that it wasn't until he was there 10 years that he was able to get anything done. He was sort of like the little kid that they stuck in the back. Let's say you've been there 4 or 5 years. What would you have liked to accomplish during that time? What do you see as the things you want to get done?
Well, first, although the seniority system is still alive and well in Congress, that's not to say that a freshman member of Congress or a sophomore that arrives with some skill and ability can't start to get things done right away. And when you look at some of the newer members like John Garamendi and Jackie Spear, you see that they have not just been sitting in the back bench. They're in there working and beginning to make a difference. But the second piece is we're in one of those historic windows of time where there have been so many retirements and so much turnover as Congress has swung back and forth the last few elections, that this is the short path to seniority, to that ranking member status, to ultimately chairmanship of committees. So this is a great opportunity for the next member of Congress to get in quickly, be put into a position where they can really get some things done.
So you want to hit the ground running?
Absolutely.
This race, the election that's coming up, is slightly different than any of the elections that we've had before. Not only is it a new district, but it's a different way of people running against each other. Yeah. It may be that there's not a Democrat versus a Republican in this race. My understanding is the top 2 vote getters in the June primary essentially go on and meet each other and compete in the November. How do you see that kind of election working, and how does it change your strategy at all as you move forward?
Well, there's one very important new twist in these rules, Larry, and that is for Democrats, if we don't come together and select the strongest, most viable Democrat to go into the fall, we could very well be sending 2 Democrats into the fall and having one of the most democratically strong districts in the country spend its time fighting intramurally during a historic election where we need to be shoulder to shoulder winning seats in Nevada and around the country and around the state. So I think the stakes are very high, and hopefully the Democratic Party is going to come together. I would like to think that I'm the candidate to get behind, and if so, we should be able to make the numbers work and run off against a Republican, and then we can all be very unified going into the fall election.
So I guess, while it's not necessarily mischief, you could have the Republicans having a major say in which Democrat they want to see elected and pick the person who's maybe more aligned with more conservative aspects of the Democratic Party?
You know, that's always theoretically possible. I've never seen that actually happen. I don't think there are people who go into the voting booth and think about how they can game the system. I think they vote their conscience and their intelligence, and for the most part, Republicans vote for Republicans. So the fact that there's one Republican, it looks like, going to be on the ballot, that to me is an opportunity, if I finish strong, to secure a runoff against that Republican.
Finally, Jared, what are your goals for me as your constituent, should you be elected to the Congress?
Well, I want to do several specific things. First, I want to keep supporting good public policy. I think that's been the hallmark of my work in the state legislature and in local government. And I'm excited about the possibilities at the federal level to do that, including taking some of California's leadership on clean energy and renewables and environmental protection that is good for the economy to Washington and making that the law of the land. The second thing I want to do is try to get things done for my constituents. So district priorities of all kinds come up. The San Quentin death row expansion came up under my watch in the state. I was able to stop it. I think one of the challenges when I get to Congress, I hope, is to bring home some funding to finish the Smart Rail project, to bring home some funding for environmental and watershed restoration, all kinds of district priorities like that. And the North Coast is loaded with needs in that regard. And then the final thing is I want to be a really accessible and responsive representative. And I want to try to change the tone in Washington that you were talking about before. That starts by sending people to Congress that do business in a professional and civil way. And that's what I intend to do.
Jared, thanks for coming on the show. Good luck with your campaign. And we're all watching to see what happens.
Thanks, Larry. Thanks for having me.
I want to welcome Andy Peri, who's the Advocacy Director for the Marin County Bike Coalition, to our show. Welcome back.
Thank you so much, Larry.
It's been a while since you've been here. Let me just tell the folks that Marin County Bike Coalition has been helping people with the quality of life and road safety in Marin since 1998. You've been with them for the past 6 years. And sort of your overall mission is to connect Marin.
That was the impetus of the beginning of the organization. In fact, one of the very first projects we worked on was to map all the roads and all the routes and see where the biggest danger areas are and where the areas that were in most need of improvements.
Because I found it interesting on your website where the goal of your organization, or one of the goals of your organization, is that people in Marin 20% of the time will be using either walking or bicycling to do their travel.
The goal, in fact, the county of Marin, in the countywide plan, has a goal of 20% walking and biking by 2020. And in fact, many of the cities and towns have adopted that same goal. So it's an ambitious goal, but we're in the teens now, so we're not super far away. But every time we create new improvements that make it safer in areas, especially areas that are the most dangerous areas, we get a little bit of a bump up of increased use of the roads for cycling and walking.
Well, on a personal note, over the last 6 months, I on weekends, very often I'll ride my bike from my house in Mill Valley to my office in downtown San Rafael. And I started doing that after I realized that a tunnel had opened from behind by the airport or the movie theater thing over there in Larkspur Landing to the dumps out by the recycling plant. And it's just great. And that's pretty new. Tell us how that came about and how that fits into the big picture here in Marin.
The Marin County Bicycle Coalition has a long history with the Cal Park Tunnel. We were the organization, Deb Hupsmith, my predecessor in this position and one of the founders of the Marin County Bicycle Coalition, worked very hard initially to stop a parking lot from being built on the right-of-way, what is now the smart right-of-way where the tunnel exists on the Marin Airporter side. Had that gone in, it would have in some ways sealed the fate. Once parking lots go in, they don't come out easily. And so the Marin County Bicycle Coalition was very instrumental in keeping that from happening, working with the Golden Gate Bridge District, and in doing so, sort of began to so-called pave the way for moving the tunnel forward. And it's through many, many years of acquiring funds and working through various political, maneuvers, so to speak, working with various agencies, cities, towns, and so forth, that the tunnel got to where it is today. In the end of 2010, the tunnel opened for the first time, December of 2010.
But it fits into a bigger picture. There's some in Novato, there's some spaces that are used for bicyclists that are much safer and more efficient now, and in Sausalito as well. Can you just tell us where they are so that if folks want to use them, they can go out there?
One of the big priorities for the Marin County Bicycle Coalition in its founding was to create what's called the North-South Greenway. North-South Greenway was an effort to get safe and as much as possible separated facilities from Sausalito all the way to Novato. And so today we have the Cal Park Tunnel that closed one very, very dangerous gap. Cyclists used to ride out Sir Francis Drake to San Quentin and cross basically a freeway on-ramp and off-ramp. You might know the route.
Yeah.
Very, very dangerous. We also worked very hard on the Lincoln Hill pathway between downtown San Rafael and the top of Portezuelo Hill. That is now open. That opened around the same time as Cal Park Tunnel. And just recently, there's a number of bike lanes, Los Ranchitos Road into Terra Linda, and Las Colinas Road, and then also as you go up into Novato, a new separated facility just opened. We call it the Enfrente connector, or it's sometimes called the commuter, South Nevada Boulevard commuter connector. But it's basically a pathway from South Nevada Boulevard to Enfrente. Cyclists used to have to ride literally on the freeway in order to get between those two spots because it was a pinch point and there's no roads connecting there.
Well, it's got to have increased the amount of people riding bicycles in that area. I mean, it's just, you could see it as I go through. There's people walking their dogs. It's just a friendly place to be.
Yeah, and overall countywide, the 2011 bike counts that were released a few months ago show since 1999 159% increase on weekends and 132, I believe it is, on weekdays. So there's been significant increases in cycling in Marin County since the Marin County Bicycle Coalition has been working with all the different cities, towns, and the county to help get these facilities in place.
And I'm sure your work's not done. I know in Mill Valley where I live, there's an old tunnel that I guess went from Corte Madera to Mill Valley towards Sausalito. There's a path that that it ends in. What's the status of that? I know you've been working to try to open that up, or
The
where
Alto,
are we?
yeah, the Alto Tunnel is also one of the major priorities, and that goes from near Edna McGuire School in Mill Valley, and it pops out in what's known as Old Town, Corte Madera. And that's a tunnel that has collapses, several collapses it's thought, but no one's been in it since the 80s. So currently the county has allocated some funding, $600,000 of non-motorized transportation pilot program funding. Those are the funds that came to Marin for bike ped projects, $25 million in total, or actually more than $25 million. But the $600,000 will go into getting inside the tunnel to look at the geotechnical kind of conditions inside, and also to do a property study on top of the tunnel to really define who owns what property on top of it. And in doing so, will help to determine what the cost would be for reopening that tunnel down the road.
But so the plan is, at this point, is exploratory to find out the status of what's actually built there or is currently there, so that you can make plans to increase bike path from Sausalito to San Mateo?
Yeah, it would be a beautiful facility. Currently, that tunnel is being held up with redwood supports, and redwood that is 110, 20 or more years old, 130 possibly years old, doesn't obviously hold up very well. And so there's been a lot of collapses within the tunnel. When that tunnel is open someday, I say when with a lot of optimism and hope, when that's open one day, you'll be able to get from Mill Valley to Corte Madera in just a few minutes, where currently you either have to take Camino Alto or the route along Highway 101, neither of which are ideal routes to take for a whole bunch of reasons.
That's my route, the one near 101. It's not great.
No.
But that's not all you guys are working on. SMART's happening.
Yes.
Where do you interface with the SMART program, and what's in store for bicyclists if when SMART's completed?
Yeah, the SMART, there was for the last 3 months, MCBC's been working very hard on against the repeal SMART effort, which was trying to kill SMART. And that failed at the end of January. They didn't get the needed signatures to get that on the ballot. As a result of that, SMART had $171 million of bond funds in escrow. That money was released, and now contracts have are being increased. They have a $103 million contract from one contractor and several other contracts. And SMART has broken ground. SMART is moving forward, and we're going to start to see more and more construction activity up and down the line at crossings as well as along the rail line.
And how do bicyclists get the benefit of the SMART construction?
Since 1999, MCBC has been working on SMART very hard to get a pathway included within the project. So when you look at the literature, it says SMART train and pathway. You look on the SMART website, train and pathway. It's a multimodal transportation system that's being put in place. So Marin County Bicycle Coalition is thrilled that there'll be a way of getting ultimately from Larkspur all the way to North Santa Rosa, ultimately to Cloverdale when the whole system is finished, on separated pathways, or what was more likely to happen, people aren't going to ride the whole 70 miles. People ride little segments of it to get to stations. People live south of a station, north of a station can use the pathway. It can be used for recreation, it can be used for commuting, it can be used for kids to get to school, to recreation, to their sporting events. People can use it to get to shopping areas or whatever. So it's going to have a huge benefit for the county of Marin and Sonoma County as well.
So these are huge projects that you're dependent upon. It seems government or bond funding, and the bicycle folks get a small component of that, so that it adds to the benefit of all of us being rail commuters and or bicyclists.
Yeah, I mean the quarter-cent sales tax that passed in 2008, Measure Q, was to fund this system, and because of the economy downturn, revenues were less than expected. So, but ultimately they've worked out the financing and gotten some additional funding coming into the project, and people are going to get a rail system, and they're going to get the pathway as well, a pathway system. And the beauty of the north-south spine that's going to be created with SMART is that it's going to connect to many of the east-west connectors and many of the pathway networks throughout the various towns as you go north along the the north-south corridor.
The Marin County Bike Coalition sounds like it's involved in really a lot of big projects. How do people find out more about you and join you on more pedestrian kind of activities?
Yeah.
Might be the wrong word. But.
Right. The Marin County Bicycle Coalition, web is a good way to connect with us, and our website is www.marinbike.com. candidacy.org. So that's one way to reach us. You know, people can reach us by telephone or whatever, but people can sign up for newsletters and connect with us on various advocacy projects that we're working on in all of the towns. We work in 12 cities and towns in the county, not to mention SMART and Transportation Authority of Marin. So we have a presence in lots of places all the time because we don't like to miss opportunities. In fact, we like to seize opportunities to get facilities built wherever possible.
What are some local facilities that you're working on then?
The other major priority for the Marin County Bicycle Coalition is the east-west connector, and there's a lot of east-west corridors throughout Marin, but the primary one is from really West Marin to Santa Fe, but one of the pieces that's being looked at right now that's a priority is from Fairfax to Santa Fe, and a study was completed on that in 2010 also, I think summer of 2010, and what that looked at, it sort of defined 15 projects between Fairfax and Santa Fe, some of them very simple. Some of them just paint and share the road arrows. We call them sharrows. Some of them are much more capital intensive and expensive construction projects. But how do you get from Fairfax to Santa Fe to the transit area most safely? And so there's a number of different projects along there that are priorities for MCBC that we're
And when you
working
say
on.
projects, you're talking about that either have to do with construction or movement of material or adding paint for a particular dedicated
Paint
lane.
for bike lanes, sharrows, in some cases moving sidewalks back, sometimes reconfiguring lanes so there's more room for cyclists, sometimes creating multi-use pathways by reconfiguring the roadway in certain ways. Narrowing lane width sometimes is an option that's available. There's dozens of different options available, and different areas have different requirements. Getting through the hub in San Anselmo, for example, is a pretty challenging place to ride. So we found a way of actually routing cyclists so they don't have to even go through the hub. And it's a much better solution because it's a scary place to ride a bike.
It sounds to me like a lot of the things that I pass on a daily basis, you are really looking at to try to make it safer for me when I get on my bicycle or our children get on our bicycle to go to school or anywhere else. And I thank you for that. And I thank you for coming back to Marin Voices and Views, and hope you come back real soon so we can talk about some of the more success that you have.
Excellent. Thank you so much for having me on.
You're welcome.